Thank you for joining us for our third episode of Ruskin Asks, the new project launched by the Ruskin Geography Department and Eco Committee. Each week during the summer, we're speaking to one guest who has had some involvement with the environmental sector. Please check out our last two episodes, the Black Mambas from South Africa and Ashley Lehman, CEO of the Orangutan Foundation. This week, we're incredibly lucky to be joined by Kit Rackley, someone who has some amazing experiences to share with us. Not only that, but they also happen to be the person who trained me to teach. So a very special episode for me. Welcome, Kit. Thank you very much for joining us.
Welcome, Mr. Moses. It's so lovely to see you.
So we'll get into sort of your career in a bit. I think what we're interested in is really where it started. So where did your career in geography begin for you?
Where did the career in geography begin? Well, careers don't tend to kind of like bloom out of nothing. There's like a lead into it. So that's quite a big question. But in terms of where geography started and how it led me into a career, it really was at high school. I had a few wonderful teachers, but one in particular was my geography teacher, Mr. Somerville, back down in Harlow in Essex, or as we used to pronounce it those days, Arlo. And basically he was like a classic teacher, like not, sit at the table and talk really, but his delivery and the way that he would draw pictures with his words was quite incredible. And he used to get to do so many creative stuff as well, like a lot of sketching, which I really used to love. And then I started to realize that as I went out and about during my daily life as a kid, I would suddenly have this kind of like geography X-ray vision. So instead of seeing like maybe a tree, I would see a whole ecosystem which was feeding nutrients around or something like that. Instead of seeing a beach, I'd be almost seeing pebbles move along and longshore drift. And I kind of like love that extra, like that. It was almost like a superpower to me. So then I always thought that geography was going to be something I was going to be doing part of my life. But then because it's such a diverse, interesting, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary subject, I had no clue what that could possibly be. So really, in terms of my career in teaching, because I first became a geography teacher, as you alluded to before, that actually didn't start until pretty much the final week of my last year at university. In other words, months before I started my teacher training. It was on a whim, and I can trace back to me doing it for three reasons. I can elaborate this later because of the questions you're going to ask. But one is that I didn't know what I wanted to do. Two is that other opportunities were taken or over competitive. And three, during my first and second year of university, I worked with kids in America on a summer camp thing, a classic summer camp in America. And I had a bunk full of 10-year-olds, and I loved it. And I was good at it. At least people told me I was good at it. So I thought maybe a career working with children isn't a bad idea. And I love geography. I've just finished a degree in environmental science. I don't know what I'm going to be doing. Why don't I train to become a teacher? It really was as flippant as that. And they say the rest is history, but I guess I'm going to elaborate a bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was your geography teacher who started you off, because we are superheroes.
It's so cliche, isn't it? It was my geography teacher that set me on the path.
I'm sure there's plenty of students that could say the same about you. And then it was to uni?
Yeah, so then I went to the University of East Anglia in Norwich and did a degree in environmental science. And I was hugely lucky to do that. I didn't get amazing grades at GCSE. I got decent grades. I only got 3 A's out of my 10 GCSEs. And then my A levels were pretty much, well, terrible for what my potential is. Let's just put it that way. And I almost didn't make it into higher education at all. And UEA was one of the ones that actually turned and said, we'll take a risk on you, we'll take a punt on you. So I guess the moral of that story is don't, as long as you're working hard and you're trying your best, don't worry too much about what number happens on that piece of paper, because you can still have these opportunities.
Why do you think they did take that risk? What was it about you that convinced them?
That's a really good question. I'm trying to figure that out for myself. But I guess it was because when I got those A-level results, and my heart sank realising those letters weren't as high as they needed to be. I needed 3 Bs and I didn't get them, and not a single B. And I think it might have been the fact that I was determined and passionate, and I actually called them directly and just said, look, this is the situation. There were some circumstances involved, but I understand that I could have probably tried a little bit harder. And this is what it is. And I'm so passionate. And I think the way that I came across and just my desire, my motivation. And they said, okay, well, we can see what your predicted grades were. We can see how much passion you've got, your references and stuff like that, your UCAS form and everything like that. My UCAS form must have been quite good enough, impressive. And then they said, okay, we'll take you on if you come this year, because originally I deferred entry and deferred entry for, I mean, maybe your year 12, 13s will know this, but year 11s won't. A deferred entry is when you skip a year and then you start the following year. So maybe you go traveling or have a gap or something. So, and they said, right, take away your deferred entry, come in September and we'll accept you. So, so I was lucky, but persistence, and character as much as those grades, really.
I mean, we'll probably get into it a little bit more, but one of the themes I'm seeing from some of the research is being able to sort of take opportunities that make themselves available rather than having that rigid plan.
And my goodness, and so much of my path in life has been taking opportunities and creating opportunities, and I can talk about that a bit later.
Yeah, that's what I'm really hoping to get from this conversation. I think that's something we can really learn. So to get back to the original question, we were at uni. What was it you found most interesting in your degree?
So with the subject, it was so many paths that you could take. I mean, the first year at university, when you do a degree like environmental science, it's very, very broad. So you do like intro to this, intro to that, intro to chemistry, mathematics for the environment or statistics for environmental studies. And it's quite broad, and you can do very big subjects. You do geology, geodynamics, which is basically tectonics and Earth. And then what then happens is that you actually start to then narrow your choices through year 2 and year 3. And just the pathways you could take was the most interesting thing to me. And the fact is, if you start going down one path, so I ended up going down the meteorology and climate path. I still didn't have enough. I still needed to do other things to make up credits to pass those years. So then I thought, well, I then took environmental epidemiology. So like the thing that's happened with coronavirus right now is exceptionally interesting to me, because I did about, the spread of disease. So how does that relate to, actually, you find out that these things do relate to each other very, very well. So then, how weather and climate plays an impact in disease and the spread of disease and epidemiological processes and things like that. And then it was interesting, you've talked to the Black Mambas, because in my second year, at the end of my second year, I actually went to South Africa with the UEA, and I did some environmental risk work with the locals just outside of Kruger National Park, actually. So it was interesting watching your interview with the Black Mambas beforehand. And yeah, so the real interest was, well, put it this way, imagine going into a sweet shop and having a whole range of things to choose from. And you always gravitate towards your favorite sweets, your favorite one or two. There's always those things that go in your bag. But every now and then, you can pick some different things off the shelf. You think, oh, this was interesting. Didn't quite notice that. I've never had this before. So yeah. So even though I specialised in a couple of things, it was having a quite, and these nice interdisciplinary, tangible things which I could feed into it. And yeah. So the interest was in the spice, the variety, and the spice of it all, really.
Yeah, that really resonates. I couldn't believe some of the things I studied on my geography degree. I mean, getting to study things like human evolution, which I'd never even considered. But you start to see how it all sort of ties in. So I suppose that climate and meteorology, that might become more relevant later, but we can't really talk about your journey without talking about teaching.
Absolutely.
So you've said that sort of came about almost like your degree, a little bit, opportunities presented themselves. What do you feel I don't know how to put it. What were sort of the highlights from your teaching career for you?
Oh my goodness, there are so many. What are the highlights? Right, so I probably will state here, and it's good for people to know as well, is that some of the lowlights are just as important and teaches you a lot about yourself and helps you to grow as a person as much as the highlights do. But to answer your question, to start with, a couple of highlights, and this is not playing to the crowd, so to speak, but one of the highlights is taking on training teachers like yourself. I mean, because I get to see these fresh minds coming in with their new ideas and fresh from the degree, and then you get to see them grow and how they learn with the students, so working with like yourself and other trainee teachers is definitely a highlight. For me, it's less about getting students grades and getting them through and making good progress. It's more about seeing the journey that they take. So I have a couple of examples. There's one particular young man who was estimated like quite low grades, and this is the days of letters, so estimate basically C's and D's. And his dream in life was to be a wrestler, right? Which he's actually fulfilled. He's a semi-pro wrestler now. Through his geography. Well, actually, it's funny because he has messaged me and said it's helped in some way, shape, or form, which is quite bizarre. But anyway, going back to, and then he would come into my classroom almost every lunchtime and say, "Excuse me, Mr. Rackley, but I'm a bit stuck with this. Can we sit?" And like just that, the highlights are the joys of the students like that who come by and really eager to learn, and then you build up a rapport with them. So not just a student-teacher rapport, but that's how I got to know that he was interested in wrestling, and then I tried to use wrestling analogies to help him learn. And then when he opened that envelope at the end of year 11, he actually ended up with an A in geography, bearing in mind his predicted grades almost across the board were C's and D's. So making those connections, those personal connections, are always highlights. Another one which is a bit more personal to me was kind of supporting some students emotionally and as well, because that's an important part of the job, as you know, safeguarding and supporting students' emotional safety as well as their physical safety. And I don't know why, but I used to have students come to me all the time, like with their eels and their moments. But there's one particular student who used to come to many of us teachers and built up the courage to come out as a transgender girl in front of the whole of her year group. It stood up in the year 10 assembly and came out in front of her whole year group, which was a magical moment. And for me, for my personal journey, was quite an inspirational moment as well. So you can see that it's not all geography related or subject related. It's actually the personal connections related. But definitely one of the highlights is taking students onto a field trip to America in 2012. It was the extracurricular group, the joggers group. And I'm lucky enough that my partner has a family which has a house out in Bozeman, Montana, and I took students out there, and that was just like the most amazing experience ever. But yeah, the low lights. But one which I will say is in my determination to make sure students achieve, in my naivety as a young teacher, I thought it was a great idea to kind of like give students like a spreadsheet just with color-coded blocks that says these are the bits in the mock exam that you need some help with, and these are the colored bits. These are the bits you did really well. And my idea was, this is a great idea. If I give this copy to everybody, they can like seek and find each other. I was like, oh, I kind of struggled with this bit. You did really well on it. Do you mind if we can? So I was going to plan a lesson to kind of get them to kind of have almost like a speed date kind of thing where they can talk to each other and support each other. But actually that made some students very vulnerable because I was displaying what they didn't do well into the rest of the class. I didn't check for consent or anything like that. And I generally thought it was a great idea, but I didn't realize that I was actually making some students very vulnerable. One particular student, rightly so, made a complaint. And it was me, the head teacher, this student and her parents. First thing they said to me when I walked in the room was, to start off, we think that you're a lovely person and a wonderful teacher, and we can't think of it, you and other teachers are the best thing that's happened to our daughter, things like this. But it was a lovely discussion, and it ended up with actually us all bursting into tears, including the head teacher.
Oh wow.
And having a consented group hug. But it was a really lovely, nice moment, because it does grounds you back down as a human being, and so it turned a low light into almost a highlight to expect, and then it really helps me on that journey to make sure that kids' emotional safety and consent and stuff like that. So yeah, I just wanted to say that to who's watching, to say don't dismiss the low lights and the down times, as they can be quite horrible and really they make you feel terrible, and you just want to push them out of the way. But if you can try and make a learning opportunity out of them, then that you turn them into low lights and the highlights, you can really grow as a human being and connect more with the people around you. Yeah.
Thank you. I think there's two really interesting bits I want to dig into there. Number one, I think it's really useful for our teachers for our students, sorry, to see teachers from a different angle. I don't think they necessarily understand the impact they can have on our lives. And I think that you've made that really obvious. Do you feel like being a geography teacher made you a better geographer?
Oh, without a shadow of a doubt. Without a shadow of a doubt. The thing is, I mean, you've students have probably heard the term jack of all trades. You know, when you kind of, well, I mean, us geography teachers, most of us have a degree in something. So like my specialism is in meteorology and climate. So yeah, okay, I have that specialism. But when it comes to other things, I had to learn. Like when I first started teaching geography, I knew nothing about glaciers. And when I taught my first year 10 class at the young age of 22, and it came to the development module, I was nervous wreck because I was like, oh my god, what if I get it wrong? What if I get what's this Rostov model?
I know that feeling.
Yeah, and but so you have to learn, and then I started, reading the kids' textbooks themselves was very helpful, and then but I always go a level above. So when I teach Key Stage 3, I want to make sure I'm prepared at a GCSE level. When I teach GCSE, I want to make sure I'm prepared at A level. When I teach A level, I want to prepare at a degree level. So what I then do is then I do some more deeper reading, and the amount of learning you do yourself is amazing. But the best thing is, and I would recommend any of your students thinking about teachers or educators or maybe teachers watching this, is that this, being human and learning with the students is the best thing you can do. And saying things like, no, I don't know that, or that's a good question. Shall we find out together? Or perhaps I'll tell you what, I'll tweak the homework a little bit. Do you want to have a go at see what you can find out and then maybe report back next, and then we'll learn together and then we'll start questioning together. And yeah, and I've been recently doing blog articles and video blogs about certain aspects that I didn't have any clue about, which now I feel a little bit more comfortable doing. But you don't have to know everything, and you can always pick someone else's brains, and there'll always be someone out there, and it could even be a student who knows better than you. So year nine young lad, teaching development, teaching. I've been to Malawi, I know a bit of Chichewa, so I can say Mulibandji, Siguma Kwabiri. But in terms of being someone who has experienced Malawian culture and lived out there, I'm a white Westerner of privilege. I don't know very much about that, so I don't want to teach stereotypes about Malawi. So I had this year 9 lad lead his class. Amazing lesson that I never taught. I learned from him myself. And then actually I managed to get him out of class and teach the other year 9 lessons about what Malawi is from a Malawian point of view. So, and I learned so much there. So yeah, absolutely. And I guess it goes with other subjects as well. If you're a historian, there are parts of history you're not quite sure of, and you learn that. If you're a biologist, you probably would have specialised in something, so you learn more. So yeah, being a teacher is one of the best ways to learn. Absolutely.
Yeah, I've found that it probably improved my understanding. When I joined, I thought, I get all this, I understand it. But actually going through it and teaching it to someone else, it really does. And I think it's nice to hear that other teachers are learning alongside the students.
Yeah, and you students, you've got to understand that there are your teachers will be just as vulnerable as you sometimes. So and they will be learning stuff for the first time sometimes, or dealing with it. So hopefully your teacher, I don't know, Mr. Moses, is comfortable with this, but hopefully your teachers will be comfortable and feeling vulnerable themselves that they're learning first time. And if a teacher says, I don't know, or shall we learn that together, you can connect with that very, very, very well, and then go on that journey together. And it makes you closer, in that parent, in that teacher-student relationship as well. So
absolutely. So the other thing I picked up there then was your tendency to sort of go the extra mile. So like you said, with the degree, you got in there because you were proactive, you went to speak to them, and your teaching career sort of followed that through. Do you feel like you got more from your career because of your approach to it?
Certainly. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. Not only kind of going the extra mile. First, when you're a young teacher and quite naive, you say yes way more times than you should do. On one side, it's brilliant because I got all these extra experiences. I got to do these extra projects and this summer stuff, but on the other side, it makes you absolutely shattered and quite drained. And it wasn't until a teaching assistant came up to me at the end of a lesson and say, "You look knackered. You start saying no a bit more." So yeah, going the extra mile is great. And I'm wondering if you have students who watch this that I think that like to do every extracurricular club or like to get in extra involved. This is great while you're young and got the energy, but perhaps even now start learning to say not right now or maybe later or no. It's not you being nasty or being selfish. It's actually being a bit of self-care. And I think, going the extra mile as a teacher, as I said, I've managed to do so much. Like that USA trip. I didn't need to do that. I just wanted to do it. So I did it. And then going and doing extra things, like I ran a World Cup themed thing during lunchtime. So basically I got it was a school run thing where every form was assigned a country in the World Cup, and then in form time they had to do some little projects like artwork, and so it was cross curriculum and whatnot, and music. And then during lunchtime we'd play the game, so they'd select 5-a-side team to play it. And then I run that completely, and it was excellent. But then if I was teaching period 4, I'd have to quickly run out, get the goals out, and then I'd miss lunch myself. So I have fond memories of those kind of things. But going the extra mile, but by the definition of the term, go the extra mile, you've got to run an extra mile, you've got to move an extra mile, you've got to spend energy an extra mile. Yeah. So I'd say to your students, try and practice doing it strategically, and if you've got the ability to do the extra mile in many things, maybe try and prioritize what you'd like to go the extra mile in. But it's a life skill that you learn over time, and I still haven't got it quite down, and I'm in my late 30s. So.
Yeah, that balance is difficult, isn't it? But committing to what you do is sort of what's opened some of those doors for you.
Yeah, and I'd say do what's required of you to the best of your ability first, obviously, and then because then that will kind of organically give you opportunities to go the extra mile. Because if you need, so like if we're planning a lesson, and you just lay it on because that's what you need to do, that's absolutely fine. If like me, you want to, I'm going to see if there's any news articles about this particular issue before I finish. That in a way is going the extra mile while fulfilling your responsibilities. So there is ways of kind of doing that, and then when it comes to applying for jobs or careers or stuff like that, and they start saying, "Can you tell us a piece of work that you're really proud of?" You can then go back to the things that you had to do, but you went the extra mile with.
Yeah, so giving yourself those chances. So I mean, you did in the end leave teaching, and I suspect our conversations about the opportunities, making them available for yourself, will become a bit more relevant now. So you took a sabbatical in America. For the benefit of our students, could you tell us a little bit about what a sabbatical is and what you did on yours?
So a sabbatical is meant to be something where you take a break from whatever you're doing, and then during that break you kind of you do tasks, research, or something which relates to your career. So the plan for me, I mean, I'm very, very, I mean, you know me, and I'm happy to say in front of students, I was getting burnt out, I was getting stressed, and I was having some mental health issues. But I didn't want to leave teaching because I loved it so much, and I loved working with the students. So I went to my head teacher and I said, I'd like to do a sabbatical, which is basically a year off. But I called it a sabbatical because I really genuinely wanted to go over to America, because my wife's from America, so I've got loads of connections out there, and go to all these places that I know I love in America, or my family place as well, and use them to enrich my teaching. And then the plan was to come back to the school and then help my department and other departments develop more resources and teaching ideas from what I'd learned in America. So that's a sabbatical, right? And some teachers go on a sabbatical to write a textbook. Some teachers go on sabbatical to visit a place that they teach about, or something, and so forth. So I approached my head teacher. I said, and she was my line manager, so she knew my personal circumstances. I said, I think I need to take a break. Will you give me a sabbatical? And I had to write a letter, say what I'd do, what the proposal was, anything like that, and that was accepted. I did that in the academic year of 2017-18. So I went to America. I hung out mostly with my friends and family out there, but it was the connections that I had that made it successful. So, for example, my closest friend, who I met at the summer camp in 2002. So I remained friends with this person. So another hint for your students: if you make connections, try to keep them if you can. And she actually works as a public outreach officer and a tour officer of the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. Now, your older students will probably don't know who they are. They're like the real big climate environmental scientists run by the US government. Huge. So if you imagine, like, if you put like the Met Office and NASA together, basically, that's like what NOAA does. They do everything about the atmosphere and the ocean. So, and she did that in Boulder, Colorado. So she got me in contact with people who worked in the climate science division. And I managed to work there for 2 months as their education officer with world-leading climate scientists with massive equipment. And I did amazing things, released weather balloons, went up in aircraft to take air measurements, and work with, world-leading climate scientists on inventions that they were making. And then the second thing I did was to work in a museum in California, in San Francisco. My cousin-in-law worked for them as their environment officer. So you can see a pattern here, links. And I worked at a place called the Exploratorium Museum in San Francisco. And when COVID's all done, if any of you guys ever end up in San Francisco, go and visit the Exploratorium. Even better, get in contact with Mr. Moses. I can get you on the guest list to get you in for free. All right.
Connections.
Yeah, absolutely. See, proof of connections. And basically, that was a dream. It's a hands-on science museum. And one of my roles was to be like an education officer for the environment program. So I would do talks. I would go and speak to visitors on the museum floor. I would take part in talks with local people. So local people would come in, talk about their environment or how science can help improve the environment or inequality and things like that, because there's a very large ethnic minority community in San Francisco. And just it's California, San Francisco. I mean, oh my God, So that was my sabbatical, and I did other things as well. Like I went back to Montana, went to Minnesota, did loads of things, and wrote a blog, which Mr. Moses can provide a link to later if anyone's interested.
Yeah, that'll be in the comments.
So that was my sabbatical.
Well, because I'd written down here NOAA and Exploratorium with a big question mark. They're not places you can just walk into. So I'd always wondered how you got in there. So it's interesting to see how those, something 12, 18 years ago, which you might not even think of, has those consequences further down the line.
Right, exactly. So my friend from the summer camp, we were young people just trying this thing out. She ended up working actually as a elementary and middle school teacher in the United States. From that, and I ended up and then we just reconnected again when we moved on and did different jobs, but both in education. So yeah, you just do not know how your connections can work out decades later. So do keep hold of connections, because you never know what you might end up. One of your friends might end up working for a place, and then you could ask them questions like, is there potentially can I come in and volunteer for it? Can I come in and see you work for a week? And then you make other connections, and you might not be paid. I wasn't paid for my sabbatical. My income was the rent from renting my house out. That was it.
Yeah.
And savings. So it was a risk, but it was a worthwhile one. So yeah, make connections.
So I suppose it's those connections and making those impressions, because if you've not got that to fall back on, then no matter how many connections you've got.
And of course, my degree helped, because when I then spoke to the connections, I then said, this is my background, this is my degree. I'm a teacher. I know about climate science because I did it for my degree. So, I could come and help talk to the members of the public who visit your labs about the work that you do. And I only understood about 25% of the science that those guys did. Wow. Incredible science, so deep and complex. Even they don't understand each other's science sometimes. So they told me because it's so specialized, but they only really communicate the bits that need to link up. And then the rest of it, I sat next to somebody with a PhD, and we were listening to someone talk about the progress on their research. And I said to them, be honest with me, how much of this do you understand? Because I said, I think I get about 25% of it, through what I know. And he said, to be fair, I probably only understand about 35% of it. Like, this person works at NOAA and is a scientist. So, it just goes to show how important it is to kind of have that connections and interdisciplinary thing, and not to worry if you don't know things.
Yeah, that's definitely answered a few questions for me. And I suppose it's nice to see that. I suppose most people think once you're in that career of teaching, you're pretty settled and you're done. But
Right.
there's that flexibility, that fluidity afterwards. Is an interesting takeaway, I think.
And I have full respect for teachers who go the whole 30 odd years career wise. I mean, maybe because going back to what we said earlier, I was always the person who'd say yes a lot and go the extra mile. I think I ended up burning out after my, 12, 13 years. And I felt like I'd done 3 times as much time. And I just, maybe that was,
In 30
you know,
years.
yeah. And that, it wasn't the only reason for the burnout and the mental health issues, but it was one of the reasons, certainly. But I guess the moral of the story is that I think don't expect or worry or be so concerned that a career will be for life. And it's okay to be unsettled. If you go down a route and you feel it's not working out or it's not panning out, it is absolutely fine and okay to feel I didn't realize that this is not for me. Or maybe the work you do is for you, but who you're working with isn't right for you. So there's going to be so many reasons why you might want a change.
Yeah.
There's going to be and it should not be a reflection on yourself. And maybe even the student, you've started an A level and you think, you know what, it's not quite. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to change A levels. I understand that, but then it's quite likely that you can end up doing a degree off at a tangent.
Yeah, you don't know where the opportunities will come later.
Yeah, speak to your university. Say, I know this degree isn't quite matching up with the A levels that I'm doing. You'll be surprised actually. A lot of universities will turn around and say, well, your A levels themselves are good enough. They show that you're committed to learning, stuff like that. And of course, don't worry about if you're not going to university. Vocational work is very important and interesting as well. So it's not always about university.
All those lessons from your career are applicable whether you go down the academic route or the vocational route or wherever you go.
Yeah.
Making those connections, working hard, keeping those doors open is going to be applicable wherever you go.
And if any of your students watching this thinking, well, I don't want to go to university, so I feel a bit devalued, absolutely try not to feel that way, because in this coronavirus epidemic, who have we mostly relied on? I know the healthcare workers, you've got to go through some kind of qualification on that. But what about all the cleaners, all the shop workers, all of those key workers? Where would we be right now without those key workers? So we need people of all types and all passions in all fields.
And whatever you do, be a good one.
Yeah.
So once you got back from your sabbatical, it turned into not a sabbatical.
Yeah, it ended up being a gap year, which is different because a gap year is like a break in anything. So basically, and talk about opportunities, what happened, it got to Easter of 2018, and I was actually preparing to go back to my high school. And then an old lecturer of mine at the UEA who taught me meteorology said, a colleague of mine is actually looking out for someone like an education officer to do what they do and then promote it in the education and help train not just students and teachers, but also train other academics. So meteorologists about how energy systems work, and energy people how the climate system works, because you can imagine that regards with the climate change, if you don't have an understanding of energy systems, then meteorologists can't produce things and information that are useful for them, like wind information, solar information, and forecasts and stuff like that. That's why I don't get this misconception that wind and solar energy is like, there you go, the sun's just gone behind a cloud now, so that's it, solar energy is useless for the next 5 minutes. It's not like that. You've got things like what's called seasonal forecasting, which means that actually that was expected. So they've planned the energy system for that. So energy people need meteorological expertise. Vice versa.
Almost plugging those gaps you noticed at NOAA.
Yeah. So then the agency I ended up working for. So I applied for the job as an education officer for a company called the World Energy Meteorology Council. So they are this group that gets energy experts and climate experts basically working together to make their systems a lot better, make the data a lot better, and it's one of the ways of helping to adapt to mitigate against climate change. And so that was right up my street. And then I was doing educational talks, and I was training actual scientists in how to communicate, and it was quite cool. I helped develop a GIS tool which your students can use, and I can give that link if you want to put it in the description a bit later as well.
Yes, please.
Yeah, and that was a complete opportunity. That was completely out of the blue. Wasn't looking for it. It was actually me meeting up with my old professor for, I came and visited during my sabbatical back in the UK. Me, him, and a meteorologist called Chris Bell, who sometimes people on the East might see on the TV doing the weather, the weatherman with the American accent. We went out for a drink, and my ex-professor said, "Did you know about this? They're interested in looking for. I think you'd fit it." And then so I handed my notice at Fram.
Just a conversation that took you in that direction.
Yeah, just a conversation, and that's what. And so I wasn't looking for an out of teaching. I was fully preparing myself to go back into teaching, and I was, and in all fairness, I was very nervous, and I was quite sad that I knew that this could be me leaving the teacher profession because I loved it so much, and I missed the students and everything. So, but when an opportunity like that comes along, you have to think to yourself, what's more valuable at this stage? Is it getting these other experiences or maintaining the status quo at the moment? So I could have made a decision either or. It could have been a metaphorical flip of the coin. I just thought to myself, this opportunity is probably not going to come around again. So I took it, and I haven't been a frontline teacher since. So that was September 2018. I started that job.
I suspect I know the answer to this question, but do you regret any of the risks you've taken?
Do I regret it? Yes and no. No, as I say, like, I'm grateful for the opportunities because they've got to meet. So if we take the choice I've made, I've just been talking about, no, because I now have friends at the Met Office who work on climate science, the Met Office and universities all around the world. I've worked with people, and I now know more about energy systems and climate systems, and I'm more optimistic about solutions of climate change because I can see everything behind the surface, and it's made me realize, learning some more, it's made me realize that actually there's more that goes on behind the scenes when it comes to solar farms and wind farms and the kind of climate data that goes into that kind of stuff. And of course, I've made new connections, like we discussed before, so which I can tap back into now. And then yes, on the other side, because one thing that fills me with joy and continues to fill me with joy is when ex-students get in contact, or I bump into them, or they contact me or something like that. And some, quite a lot of them are in their mid to late 20s now. And they say things like you were saying earlier, like actually a few of them have become geography teachers because of me, or they're doing a career and they say, or something completely unrelated, like an ex-form student of mine. I won't, for consent and privacy reasons, I won't say who they are, but they're actually a bit of a media personality now. But while they were in year 8, their mother passed away, which is of course very traumatic at that age. And he said the comfort and the support and the drive you gave me to keep going is why I'm doing how I've got the energy to do what I'm doing now. Because there are moments in my life when I could have given up, but I didn't because I kept remembering what you said. And now he's this kind of like social media and media kind of person in East Anglia anyway, and I reckon he's going to go places. So the yes and the regret is almost a bit self-serving to say this, but having those kind of moments and those influencing more people's lives, not influence as in steering them, but giving them the confidence, giving them the belief, but 13 years in the career, I think I've cast a lot of pebbles into the pond and sent ripples out, and then they will go and make ripples themselves. So yeah, regrets, more like a dreamily nostalgia. I'd love to do that again. Maybe one day I'll be back in the classroom. So,
and better for it.
Well, less.
Sorry, I mean, we spent a lot longer on all that than I intended to. I did want to dig into the environmental issues a little bit, and certainly our sixth form researcher who's been looking into some of these sectors really wanted to dig down into the climate change aspect a little bit more, with it being such a relevant topic at the moment. you mentioned there that you've got a little bit more hope for your experiences.
Yes. So the students, what I would say to the students as well is that it's quite difficult to feel hopeful right now, because it's not just putting the media away and outside. You now have scientists using quite emotive language, and they only use language if it's accurate and applicable. So when you've got scientists in their articles or in their journals using words like Siberian heat wave would be impossible without anthropogenic human-made climate change. Scientists don't use the words like impossible unless it's accurate and appropriate, or using words like emergency. So when you start having scientists using almost the same kind of language as the media, then you know we've got a problem. Now that's could make you feel quite down. It could make you feel quite drastic and upset. However, we know that there is a certain amount of climate change that is happening and will happen, because there's a lag between our carbon emissions, and of course it takes a while for the climate system to change to those changes in the atmosphere, the chemistry in the atmosphere. So we're set into a certain level of warming as it is, but we can still avoid what's called dangerous climate change when we start hitting various tipping points, and which could accelerate it further. And the kind of things that I've seen, which have been really cool, is if I've got the book behind me. So there's one thing which, excuse me, there. It's my working office. It's all over the place. Great. So this book right here is pretty good, and you can see them online. So Drawdown, fantastic kind of way that gives you about all the different ways that you can mitigate and draw down carbon out of the atmosphere, and it's so diverse. So you've got your classic ones like geothermal energy, wind energy, and stuff like that. But then you've got things like, how temperate forests. And it gives you some examples of the work they're already doing. Retrofitting buildings, like the Empire State Building has been undergoing quite a lot of things. Bike infrastructure, net zero, family planning, of course. And there's a whole section actually on women and girls, about how empowering women and girls and educating women and girls around the world is one of the best things you can do to help mitigate and adapt to climate change. So books like this fill you with hope, because they give you examples of things that are really happening. And I didn't come across this apart from, unless my job, because I got to speak
I wasn't aware of that one. That's one I'm going to have to buy.
Project Drawdown, drawdown.org, projectdrawdown.org. Excellent thing. And so then I start learning about that. And of course, I already mentioned about how there's already work going on to make sure that we optimize renewable energy. So climate scientists do things called seasonal forecasts. So they forecast 3 months ahead. The energy sector use that information to know, when they can optimize wind energy and solar energy. So if it's going to be quite a sunny month, they know that they can maybe turn down the input from fossil fuels, because they know there's more solar energy coming in. So it's all about regulating the grid and things like that. And then and we know through just basic climate that you get generally more wind in the winter and more sun in the summer. So those two things can help support each other. And I can't go into depth because I can't understand it myself, but you have no idea how much research and work has gone into that to optimize the. And one of the reasons why you see renewable energy taking off is not because it's so affordable now, and it's actually becoming cheaper energy to produce than fossil fuels. Although that's a trigger, that's a catalyst. It's all this extra work that's going on underneath as well. And then you've got battery storage. I mean, we only see the commercial side of things, the consumer side of it all. But again, there's so much work going on to making battery storage, both home batteries or batteries for grids or for solar farms or wind farms. The technology on that is coming on immensely. And I've got an electric car, and in a few years' time, I'll be able to plug my electric car into my house, and the solar panels on my roof can charge my electric car, and I can use my electric car as a battery for my house. Oh, wow. So, that's you'll see that coming online in the next few years. So there's reasons to be optimistic. I think the greatest fear and worry, I mean, us as kind of Westerners, especially white Westerners, we have a lot of privilege in the fact that we are going to be the least impacted by climate change impacts. But So I think the real worry is going to be the effect on the vulnerable. And if you're an empathetic person, I mean, I'm quite an empathetic person. For me, the real worry and cause of anxiety is the impact going to be on the most vulnerable in society. And that can happen in the UK. So I'm currently writing an article for the Geographer Association about climate change as a safeguarding issue. And the floods that happened in Sheffield last year, there was a school in Sheffield which was not flooded itself, but unfortunately the floods in that school, around that school, meant that a few students actually had lost their homes. And because they were vulnerable students already, like low income, stuff like that, they were on the verge of being homeless. And that's in the United Kingdom. So it's those kind of people who are going to be having the most anxiety. So the question is for us, how are us who can do something, what changes can we make in our life to make a positive difference and take action? So not get bogged down, allow yourself to feel anxious. You're allowed to do that. How can you turn that anxiety into action or into agency? So that's a good thing that you can look into as well. So I would say optimistic maybe is not the right word, perhaps realistic, and that if we all band together, we can make it through this and we can avoid the worst. So there's still time for that.
The thing that gives me hope, and we were discussing this with Ashley last week, the students we teach really sort of get this issue and care about it. And we've got our eco committee, which have helped set this up. And, Ashley was highlighting the importance of the local action and the impact that can have wider as well. And it's interesting to hear about some of the things you're talking about there that maybe people won't be aware of, the things bubbling under the surface that hopefully we'll see a bit more of in the next few years. One of the questions, and I think our sixth form researchers really hit on an interesting thing here that you've sort of discussed on, is whether climate change should be a political or a science issue.
Yeah, that's a big question. Whoever said that, thanks for that. That's fantastic. When an issue becomes when an issue becomes so big that it starts impacting people's lives, it's unavoidably a political issue. Scientists don't want it to be a political issue because it's science. And for me, who's worked with the data, seen the data, and worked with people who are, who've gone through the process of that, I know that anthropogenic human climate change is real. And everything that you see that come out from authoritative sources, so the Met Office, the IPCC, NASA, NOAA in the United States, you can rely on those sources. They are not in the job of telling lies because it undermines their science. And if can you imagine every scientist in the world being part of a global conspiracy just to get money? It doesn't work like that. Honestly, science doesn't
get them to work together in the same room, let alone.
Exactly. And scientists are always out to disprove each other, not maliciously, because that's how science misfoots. They want to try and pick holes in order to make sure that you've got it right or got it as best you can. So, but the trouble is that when you get an issue like this and scientists give out scientifically based recommendations of what should happen, people start to look at that as an infringement on their freedom and an infringement on their beliefs, or an infringement of what they can and can't do, because it's like the man telling them what they can and can't do. And as soon as that happens with any scientific issue, it now becomes a political issue, because then you'll have populist politics who will resist that because, well, the people don't want, like coronavirus. Some people don't want to wear face masks. So, especially in America, so you get populist politicians saying, freedom, you should be able to do what you want, not wear face, which is completely beside the point. It's got nothing to do with restrictions on freedom. And it's the same with climate change. So yes, we should all be eating less or no meat. Absolutely not. But for the people who love meat, and they get people telling they shouldn't eat meat, they see that as an infringement on their freedom and on their rights, which is a bit of a push. But and then they side with politicians who do not promise to ban meat, banish meat, reduce meat, make it low carbon, whatever. So unfortunately, the way that society is structured, and this is one of the downsides of democracy, so to speak. It's like, I've forgotten who said it, but someone said that democracy is the worst form of government apart from everything else. Yeah. But anyway, so unfortunately, climate change is a political issue, but not by choice, which is why you have pressure groups like Extinction Rebellion, and why they're so polarizing, because they're seen as a political entity, and then of course now you get people who don't understand the situation of science, think it's all about politics, and all they want to do is change other people's lives, and then it becomes very polarized like that. So if you do want to get into the climate change issue, you can't avoid the politics side of things, and you're not going to convince those people who have set and saying I do. So where you want to try and do is meet in your own way. Say, well, what changes can you make? What changes can you do? What can you do in your life? And the best quote,
can do something.
Yeah, the best quote I've seen somewhere, something like, we're not trying to everybody to have a perfect solution. We want everyone to have imperfect solutions. Because if everybody does what they can, that adds up. How many of your students have seen that meme that says, "Oh, it's only one plastic straw," said 7.5 billion people. Yeah, that's what it is. So for your student, if what you can do is best, and young people getting political is a great way as well. And having the support with grown-ups to do that is very important in my respect. But how can you do that more effectively? How can you write into your MP? Having your family to write into, or vote in the politicians that have green policies and things like that. So it's the answer. The short answer, too long didn't read, is you can't avoid it. It is political.
Yeah. What influence do you think social media has on the climate change debate, or could have?
Too much. Because what it does, it makes it difficult to sort the wheat from the chaff. And that's a saying, you youngsters, to say that what is relevant and what is not relevant, what is real and what is not real. So that's why you see a lot more organisations use social media, but the problem is that they're very, very poor at fact checking. They're very, very poor at calling people out. And it's not censorship. It's not what's the cancel culture. It's not that kind of thing. It's not that kind of thing at all. If you have someone on social media spouting that injecting disinfectant is a good idea, that's harmful. It's not true. There's no evidence that it works, and B, it can actually harm or kill someone. So that being able to say that you should be doing that thing, that's not freedom of speech. That's harm. That's causing harm. So there's a difference between freedom of speech. So the problem is with social media is that they don't have a very good regulation, and they're very scared of going down that route of regulation and monitoring, because too many people see it as censorship. So putting fact-checked tweets on Donald Trump's tweets, for example, is a good idea, but his supporters won't like it and want Twitter to be shut down, for example.
We had a fantastic debate in my key worker bubble with some year sevens getting really passionately into this, the difference between free speech, free media. And I suppose the onus becomes on the individual to educate themselves in this case. Free
speech to me is I subscribe to the hate speech is not free speech, for a start. The other thing I subscribe to is absolutely free speech, 100%, everyone should have it. But just like we tell our students, isn't it, is that if you want to write, there's a responsibility that comes with each right. So the right to free speech comes with the responsibility that you should be held to account for your views. So if you put out, because it's freedom of speech, that you should be injecting disinfectant into your veins to cure coronavirus, which we know is complete nonsense, you should, the responsibility of giving that piece of information out is that you should be challenged on it. So social media can be good in that respect, that it can have checks and balances, but it needs, for me personally, it needs the people at the top to facilitate that. It needs the Mark Zuckerbergs and the Jacks of Twitter to turn around and say, if someone tweets about something, we'll put a little link underneath that gives people the opportunity to have a look at an official authoritative source about checking whether they're right. And of course, then the next debate is, what do you classify as an authoritative, reliable source? But at least that moves the conversation, the debate onwards.
Yeah, it's a minefield, isn't it? I suppose it could, in terms of getting the positive message out there, there's probably no better way than social media.
Absolutely, yeah.
But those checks and balances are important.
So your students, use your social media, but always take things with a pinch of salt and double check on things. So if someone claims something on social media, there's like fullfacts.org is a very good one, like an independent fact-checking service. And just go to an official site who specializes in that issue and see what they say. So if it's a climate change tweet, and it's not from an official site, so it's not from NOAA Climate, for example, then go onto NOAA's website or onto their Twitter feed and see what they say about the issue. And another thing there's a really good website called the Media Bias Chart. And what you can do with it, just Google it and you'll find it. And the Media Bias Chart gives you a chart that you can use to identify which media sources are more likely to be factual based and least biased. So then you can go to those media websites and see how they're reporting on the issue. So there's always ways to go around it. So don't not use social media. And Wikipedia, sorry for any Ruskin teachers who ban Wikipedia with their students, but in my opinion, you should be using Wikipedia on one condition. If the claim doesn't have a number after it, a reference after it, dismiss it, because it's probably someone's opinion. And if it does have a number at the end of the sentence, click on that number, it will take you down to the references, and then check out the source of that claim. And then if it takes you to an authoritative source, then that's fine to quote from. But impress your teachers and quote the reference, not quote Wikipedia.
That's what I try and tell them. You can start with Wikipedia, but don't leave it there.
It's an entry. It's an entry point.
It's the beginning point.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much. I think we've had some fantastic insights there. I've taken up far too much of your time. If I could I think I've got two more questions left that I think could be very good.
No, my pleasure.
Number one, and you've sort of touched on it a bit, what do you think you found most rewarding in your career? What would you, I suppose from that, what would you suggest people should be looking for when they're planning their careers?
What they're looking for planning careers? Don't worry too much about planning your career for a start. Go with what your heart is set on now. And with the recognition that might change one day. So, and that change is okay. Whether the opportunities come along and the environment and the circumstances give you the chance to change the opportunities is another matter. But then you can cross that bridge when you come to it. But for me, the highlight would most certainly be what geography and environmental science has done for me is, and what I always say to students is I never pressured students to take GCSE geography. I've never pressured students to do A-level or go into degree or something related. What I said to them, and this is I believe is the truth, is that if you do an interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary subject like geography or environmental science is a little bit narrower and more on the sciencey base, you're very unlikely to close doors. You're very unlikely to close doors. If anything, you'll certainly keep opportunity doors in the future open, maybe even open ones that you never knew existed. And it also gives a little bit more flexibility and resilience, because the students now who are coming into their GCSEs think about doing their GCSEs, the job market's going to be completely different in 10 years' time. But what are they going to be focusing on? Well, you run through the drawdown book or the website, you'll see the multi reasons, and they're all geography related. So geography feeds into quite a lot. And there's some statistics out there say that geography makes people some of the most employable out there, not because of what you learn, but because of the variety of the spice of life kind of aspect of it. So,
I always think it's the connections between those things as well, to a different perspective.
And I don't know if you remember, Mr. Moses, but I used to play this game with the year sevens, where to introduce geography, I used to say to them, I want you to challenge me, give me 5 topics that you don't think I can relate to geography.
What you've done there is expose me to my year sevens.
Aha! So do it, but you'll find that when it comes to linking back to geography, you can't avoid it. So for the older ones of us, you may remember Bob Monkhouse, the comedian, who the audience used to give him 2 words, and he used to tell a whole entire story, which used to lead from one word or name to another word or name. And I don't know if it's on YouTube or anything like that, but if you ever see, I don't know what he called it, like linking 2 words together or something like that, but if you ever see Bob Monkhouse do that, he's incredible. But geographers can do that. You take that subject and you'll get back to geography, and then you realise that to understand all those links in between, geography helps. So my highlight, therefore, is just how much it exposes you to. The fact that you can look at almost anything and then understand, or at least start to understand, what processes go on behind it. So
I
Really?
think you've answered my second question in there as well brilliantly. It's nice
Excellent.
to hear someone talk so passionately about, not even just about geography, but about what they do.
Yeah, and I can't. I mean, my life could have taken another turn. When I was a bit younger, I wanted to do something to do with space, like astrophysics or something like that. But that was even higher grades needed for that, and it was even more competitive. So I kind of abandoned that idea very quickly. Um, but but I'm just thinking, can you imagine if like an astrophysics, you know how interesting, amazing, and fantastic that would be, but how narrow it could be as
Mm.
well. So it's almost like putting your eggs in one basket. But we do need astrophysicists. So if any of you out there are thinking about it, it's incredible. A friend of me, one of my wife's, who lives in California in Santa Cruz. Her daughter was an astrophysicist. God, she's like one of the most brainiest people out there, and she's discovered like planets in habitable zones and stuff like that. Like, whoa! But
Yeah,
yeah, so if you want to specialize in something, you can. So but geography does keep your doors open.
yeah. I do like that phrase, doors open. I always think students will come and say to me, well, what's the point in doing geography? I know what I want to do. I'm like, well, keep your doors open. And
Yeah,
I've had that with one of our year 13s who wasn't sure about geography, but is now applying for environmental and practitioner apprenticeships.
yeah.
So keeping those doors open.
And the skills and the knowledge and the understanding you get from that, if they decide, you know what, I actually did originally want to do, then actually that you'll be able to find a pathway back to it.
Absolutely.
So
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
it's been absolute my pleasure. And I
There's
know I ramble on a bit, but I hope at least it was interesting.
No, I found it fascinating. I think there's some really good lessons from there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And it's lovely to see you again, Mr. Moses, and to see that you're doing well.
Yes, and thank you for being a useful connection.
Always, always.
Thank you.